in chapter 12, John wrote about Satan being cast out of heaven, and then he went further and he explained the results of that on the nation of Israel and how it was going to affect them and also how it was going to affect those who got saved after the rapture. And in chapter 13, John introduces the two powerhouses of the tribulation period. The first powerhouse, of course, is the Antichrist. He is the political powerhouse. And then you have the false prophet. He is the religious powerhouse. And these two are going to join religion and state, and they're going to control the majority of the earth. Now, to me, this is one of the most interesting parts of the book of Revelation. But it's also one of the most confusing. And you'll see why as we go through chapter 13, and then we skip to parts of chapter 17. But even though this section can be confusing, I made a promise to you last week. Do you remember that promise? I promised that I was going to make this so simple that even a child could understand it. And I'm going to keep that promise. Now, of course, the Holy Spirit is going to have to help me do that. And so if for some reason you come up to me after the service and you say, well, Pastor, you didn't do that. I don't understand it. I'm going to say, well, it's not my fault. It's the Holy Spirit. So anyways, I'm going to trust that the Holy Spirit is going to anoint me to teach this in such a simple way that everyone here is going to be able to understand it. But I'm also going to trust that the Holy Spirit is going to anoint you and give you ears to hear what the Spirit would say to you. So, let's begin by reading all of the verses in chapter 13 that describe the beast, and then all of the verses in chapter 17 that explain the mystery of the beast. In other words, who the beast is and what the beast is. So, let's start with chapter 13, and we're going to read verses 1 through 4, and then we're going to jump down to verse number 14. So, let's start with verses 1 through 4. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can make war against him? Now let's jump down to verse 14. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast. So this is talking about the false prophet here, but we're going to jump to the Antichrist in just a second, or the beast. He deceived the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Now we're going to jump to chapter 17, and we're going to read verses 7 through 13. So just follow along with me. Then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that she rides, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and will come up out of the abyss and go to his destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because he once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7, and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. See? That's so simple that even a child can understand it. Yeah, right. Can you see why this is so confusing to most people? It's like a riddle. How many of you like riddles? Someone gives you the riddle and you try and figure this thing out. Well, I'll be honest with you. When it talks about the beast in chapter 13 and we get to chapter 17 and he says, I'm going to explain the mystery of the beast. And you go, all right. It sounds almost like a riddle. But trust me, it's really not that difficult to understand if you understand the book of Daniel. Daniel holds the key. And for all of you that thought, why doesn't he just stick with the book of Revelation? It's because Daniel holds the key. So let me give you a little bit of information that you need to know in order to understand the mystery of the beast. As I said, it all goes back to the book of Daniel. First of all, you need to know that the heads on the beast represent kingdoms. Remember Daniel's vision of the four wild beasts? We did a review of it last week. The third beast, which represented the Grecian Empire, had four heads. That's because when Alexander the Great died shortly after he conquered the entire world, his kingdom was divided among his four generals. Cassander took Macedonia in the western part of the empire. Lysimachus took Thrace in the northern part of the empire. Seleucus took Syria in the eastern part. And Ptolemy took Egypt in the southern part. But my point is this. The four heads on the third beast in Daniel's vision represented four kingdoms. So we know, based on Daniel's vision, that the heads on the beast represent kingdoms. So I want you to repeat after me. The heads on the beast represent kingdoms. Are you ready? Let's do it. The heads on the beast represent kingdoms. If you didn't write that down, you're going to wish you had of later on. In about 6 months or a year when you're going back and trying to remember this. But that's the key. The heads on the beast represent kingdoms. The second thing that you need to know is that you can't start counting the kingdoms that have persecuted the nation of Israel and that have come and gone based on Daniel's visions. Why? Because Daniel was only concerned with the kingdoms that would reign during the time of the Gentiles, which were the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Grecian Empire, and the Roman Empire. So his visions did not include two of the previous empires or kingdoms that persecuted the nation of Israel, which were Egypt and Assyria. If you remember, the nation of Israel were slaves in the land of Egypt. Moses came and he delivered them, and we have a whole book that's just dedicated to how that happened, and it's called the book of Exodus. Assyria conquered the 10 northern tribes in Israel in 722 BC and carried them into captivity. He could have done the southern kingdom too. Remember, there was a split after Solomon. And the split was between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The 10 northern tribes and 2 of the southern tribes. But what is interesting is Assyria didn't do that because they hadn't gone into the idolatry to the extent that the 10 northern tribes had. So God protected them, but when Assyria came in, he conquered the 10 northern tribes and he carried them into captivity. Now, if you don't know that there were 2 kingdoms before the Babylonian Empire that persecuted the nation of Israel, you're going to get confused when you study the beast in the book of Revelation. But the reason that Daniel did not include them is because they existed before the time of the Gentiles. Now, does everyone know what the time of the Gentiles are or refers to? Does everyone know? Well, that is a phrase that Jesus used in Luke chapter 21, verse number 24, to refer to the Gentile domination over the nation of Israel, and more specifically over Jerusalem. This is not going to pop up on the screens, but if you don't mind, I'm going to read Luke chapter 21 because I think you need to hear it. This is Jesus' own words. In verse number 24, it says, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." So what he's saying is, Jerusalem is going to be controlled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Now, let's go a little bit further. When did the time of the Gentiles begin? Did it begin in Jesus' day? Oh, no. It started hundreds of years before Jesus ever came. It actually began in 586 BC when the city of Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed by the Babylonians. And the Jews were carried into captivity. How many of you have been taught about the Babylonian captivity? Well, that's what we're talking about. Now, that's why Daniel's vision began with the Babylonian kingdom, because he was only concerned with the kingdoms that existed or would exist during the time of the Gentiles. But as I said, there were 2 world empires before the Babylonian kingdom that persecuted God's people. And who were they again? Egypt and Assyria. So let me give you a list of the world empires that persecuted the nation of Israel, because these are the kingdoms that God is interested in, and these are the ones that we're going to zero in on in the book of Revelation. The first one, of course, was Egypt. If you remember, Jacob and his children, they went down to Egypt, and they became slaves there because a Pharaoh arose that did not remember Joseph. Then you had Assyria. Assyria came in and conquered the northern 10 tribes, and they carried them into captivity. And of course, we had Babylon. And I'm going to put 722 BC out here. And Babylon came in and defeated the southern kingdom in 586 BC and carried them into captivity. And then you had the Medo-Persian Empire. They took over after that one. See, this is why I did that. Isn't that nice? And then after the Medo-Persian Empire, you had the Grecian Empire. And then you had the Roman Empire. And then we're going to have another. I've been talking about it. What is the last empire that's going to come? It's still future. The revived Roman Empire. But these 6 are the kingdoms that ruled and started the time of the Gentiles. All right? So here's a list of those, and hopefully you'll remember them. And that revived Roman Empire is actually going to come out of that last one. So now we know everything that we need to understand the mystery of the beast. We know what the heads on the beast represent. What do they represent? Kingdoms. And we know that we need to start counting the kingdoms beginning with Egypt, not Babylon. You'll see what I mean in just a little bit when we get back to the book of Revelation. So let's go back to the book of Revelation and let's start studying the beast. And let's see how all of this fits together. And I think you're going to be shocked at really how simple this is. So turn to Revelation chapter 13. Let's begin with verse number 1. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. Now I want you to notice that the beast arises or comes out of the sea. Now, what does the sea represent? Do you remember? The sea in biblical times always represented the Mediterranean Sea, but it also represented the Gentile nations. So in the vision that John has, this beast is coming up out of the Gentile nations. The beast had 7 heads and 10 horns. Revelation chapter 17, verses 12 and 13 tell us that the 10 horns represent 10 kings. These 10 kings have not reigned yet. They are going to reign in the future when the revived Roman Empire comes up. So let's read verses 12 and 13. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. This, of course, corresponds to the 10 toes on the feet of the statue and Daniel's vision of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. If you remember, the feet with 10 toes represented the revived Roman Empire that would be made up of these 10 kings. And if you remember, the Antichrist would come along and he would pluck up 3 of the horns. In other words, he would conquer them. And the rest of the 10, the 7, would give their power unto him. But they're still going to be kings. They're just giving their power or their authority to the Antichrist. So everything is matching up so far with Daniel's visions and the rest of biblical prophecy. Now, what do the 7 heads on the beast represent? They represent 7 kingdoms. Remember, the heads on the beast represent kingdoms. So the 7 heads represent 7 kingdoms. 6 of the heads represent past kingdoms, and the 7th head represents the revived Roman Empire. So every one of these kingdoms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, these 6 heads are going to represent the previous 6 empires, and the 7th is going to represent the revived Roman Empire. Now, how do I know that? Well, I'm going to show you tonight. In verse number 2, it says that the beast has the body of a leopard, the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. Those are characteristics of past kingdoms. If you remember, in Daniel's vision of the 4 wild beasts, the Grecian kingdom was like a leopard. The Medo-Persian kingdom was like a bear. And the Babylonian kingdom was like a lion. Look at verse number 2. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power, and his throne, and great authority. So as you can see, the beast in Revelation is combining all of the characteristics of the previous kingdoms into one great kingdom. The final Gentile kingdom. That's why it has 7 heads. 6 of the heads represent previous kingdoms, and the 7th head represents the final kingdom, the revived Roman Empire. Now, I'm going to prove this to you beyond a shadow of a doubt. I don't want any of you walking out of here and saying, well, you know, he just kind of threw that out there. I'm not sure that that's really what that means. Well, let me prove this to you beyond a shadow of a doubt. Turn to Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. Now, if you remember, chapter 7 is explaining the mystery of the woman and the mystery of the beast. Look at verses 9 and 10. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other is not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for a little while. Now, I'm going to get off tangent for just a little while. I'm going to go off on a different tangent. Does everyone know who the woman is or what the woman is? Well, let me just tell you. The woman is a city. Look at Revelation chapter 17, verse number 18. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So I want you to repeat after me. The woman is a city. Let's do that again. The woman is a city. We're going to find out a little bit later what else she represents and what that city represents. But for now, you just need to know that the woman is a city. Now, I'll stick with my notes. I so want to go off on this and get in depth, but I'm going to make sure I don't because I'm going to keep it simple. So look back at verse number 9. This calls, it says, for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Now remember, the woman is a city. So what I want you to do is I want you to cross out the word woman, and right above it, I want you to write the word city. So notice what verse number 9 is saying. It's saying that the 7 heads are 7 hills on which the city sits. Now, what city has always been known as the city of 7 hills? There's only one city in the world that's always been known as the city of 7 hills, even in ancient times. Rome. Rome is the city of 7 hills. So Rome is the capital of the beast. It's the capital city of the revived Roman Empire, which is going to give us a big clue as to who this woman is and what she represents. Yes, the woman is a city, but Rome represents something when we come to chapter 17. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. So that is what verse number 9 is telling us. That the capital city of the revived Roman Empire, the capital city of the beast is Rome. Now let's move on. Let's look back at verses 9 and 10. This calls for a mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits, or the city sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The 7 heads, he says, are also 7 kings. I want you to underline the word kings. The word kings is translated from the Greek word basileus, which can refer to kings or kingdoms. In this context, it does not mean kings. In this context, it means kingdoms. So the 7 heads are 7 kingdoms. Now, look back at verse number 10. They are also 7 kingdoms. I just replaced that word kingdoms for kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. Now notice what he says. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. Now, when John wrote this, the Roman Empire was in power. They were in control. They were the world empire that had conquered all the nations. So, 5 kingdoms had fallen: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persian, Grecian. These are the 5 kingdoms that have fallen. And the one at power when John wrote this was the Roman Empire. So notice what he says. 5 have fallen. 1 is. Is what? Is in power. So that tells us that the 6th was the Roman Empire. The other, he says, has not yet come. That's going to be the revived Roman Empire. Now, why is it called the revived Roman Empire? Well, let's find out. Turn back to chapter 13. Let's look at verse number 3. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. One of the heads received a fatal wound. Well, I want you to underline that word fatal. Fatal is translated from the Greek word thanatos. Now, if you remember when I was teaching a series on hell, 2-3 weeks ago? I told you that the Greeks had 2 words for death: thanatos and nekros. Thanatos refers to physical death. Nekros refers to spiritual death. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, God told them, the day that you eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Now, did they physically die the very day that they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? No. They lived for hundreds of years after that. So was God lying? No. They spiritually died. Nekros. They were separated from God. And because God is the life force, when they were separated from God, they spiritually died, which led to their physical death. So when we get to the book of Revelation, and he starts talking about people dying, and this is the second death, it's because he's making a distinction between physical death and spiritual death. Well, the word that he uses here is not spiritual death, it is thanatos, physical death. So this is talking about a wound that has caused physical death. That's why it translated as this is a mortal wound or this is a fatal wound. It has died. Now, let me ask you a question. Let's see if you can get this. What do the heads on the beast represent? Kingdoms. Right? Yes. Now, all of the previous kingdoms have died out. The Egyptian kingdom no longer exists. Neither does the Assyrian, the Babylonian, the Persian, the Grecian, or even the Roman today. At least not as world empires. Some of you might come up to me and say, well, Egypt's a nation. Well, yes, they are, but they're not a world empire, people. Just go there. Iraq, Persia. You come to me and you say, well, actually that would be Babylon. Yes, we had to go in there, but it is not a world empire. Iran, which is Persia, is not a world empire. These are no longer world empires, but one is going to be revived and become a world empire again. The Roman Empire. You see, the Roman Empire fell on August the 24th, 410 AD, when an army of barbarians led by a man by the name of Alaric sacked the city of Rome. And then on September the 4th, 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. And the Roman Empire was dead, at least the western part was. But John tells us it's going to be revived. The fatal wound of the head. One of the heads. In other words, this kingdom died. Well, all of them died. Yes, but one of them is going to be revived. That's why we refer to the beast as the revived Roman Empire. Now, I'm going to stop here, even though there's a lot more to learn about the Antichrist. A lot more. But the reason I'm going to stop is because if I continue on and begin to give you all of the information, I'm going to give you information overload. So what I really want is for you to digest this simple bit of information that I'm giving you. And then next week we're going to come back. And we're going to look at the one that was and is not. And he comes up from the abyss. And then we're going to look at the 8th head, but he's a part of the 7th. We're going to be able to see how all of this fits together. And here's what's interesting. Daniel told us the majority of this. So, I'm going to give you a chance to digest this information, this simple information, for the rest of the week. And then next week, we're going to continue studying the mystery of the beast. But I do want to do a quick little review, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. All right? The beast that rises out of the sea in chapter 13 is the 7th kingdom, the revived Roman Empire. Now, what do the heads represent? Kingdoms. The beast has 7 heads. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. 5 had fallen by the time that John wrote the book of Revelation. 1 was in power at the time, which was the Roman Empire, and 1 was yet to come. Now, because the beast has 7 heads and possesses characteristics of the previous kingdoms, it tells us that this is going to be a composite of all the previous kingdoms that Satan has used to persecute the nation of Israel. In fact, I'm going to just kind of sneak ahead. I might not have time to bring this up even next week. When you go back and you look at Daniel's vision of Nebuchadnezzar's dream in the statue, it says that the head was golden. It tells us about the chest and arms being silver. We look at the bronze, which is coming to the Grecian, and then we come to the iron, which is the Roman. But then it gets down to the feet, and it says it's mixed with iron, and it's mixed with clay. And it has 10 toes. That's the feet of it. And then it says that a rock was cut out of the mountain, and the rock came in, and it hit the feet. It smashed it. But here's what's interesting. Go back and read this. It says, the whole statue together crumbled, and it was blown away. And the rock grew to cover the whole earth. And that tells us that the kingdom of God is the rock. Jesus is the rock. But here's what's interesting. It didn't say on the statue that the only thing left was the feet, so it hit it. No, it says, in fact, it specifically says, the whole statue together crumbled. Why? Because by the time you get to the revived Roman Empire, it has all of the characteristics of the previous empires. In fact, what's kind of interesting is it's like the sum of all the kingdoms that have gone before it. In fact, I'm going to go a little bit further. I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. I want you to look in the book of Revelation. Don't worry, this isn't coming up on the screen. Go to Revelation chapter 12. My wife will tell me tonight, you were doing real well if you'd have just stopped. Revelation chapter 12, verse number 3. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. Now, doesn't that sound a lot like the beast? Okay, this red dragon comes, but we know, because we read further, that this red dragon is who? He gives us so many different descriptors of him to make sure that we know who this is. This is Satan. This is the devil. This is the one that's deceived the whole world. But if you notice, he has 7 heads and 10 horns. But I want you to notice where the crowns are. Where are the crowns? On the 7 heads. Now when we get to chapter 13 and we're talking about the beast is going to look just like the red dragon, but there is a difference. Look in chapter 13, verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. Now, why did the devil, the red dragon, have the crowns upon the 7 heads? I'll tell you. It's because the devil used these kingdoms to do his will, to persecute the woman, to try and keep the seed of the woman from coming, who is the Messiah. And so really, even though there were men that ruled every one of these kingdoms, guess who ruled through them? Satan did. And so he has the 7 heads and the crowns upon the heads because he was the king of the kingdoms of this world. And what's kind of interesting, when we were in chapter 10 in the book of Revelation, and remember when the trumpet blew, and what did we hear? The kingdoms of this world have now become the kingdom, singular, of our God and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So what we find is that Satan ruled. Now, When he gives his authority, he's finally going to give his throne and his authority, and the Antichrist is going to be possessed, and he's going to be ruling the revived Roman Empire. But these 10 kings are going to come, and their crowns are not on the 7 heads. They're on the 10 horns, the kings, because Satan says, boy, this is my last-ditch effort. I'm going to empower them with everything that I have. And they are the kings, and they're going to rule. But this Antichrist is going to be demonically possessed.